So today I'll be making a video that is quite based off of my own opinion, and really my experience with Overwatch and other games. And today I'll be talking about why Overwatch will never be a balanced game, and why that's actually an okay thing. Now, I think like everyone else, I can support wanting a balanced game. I can support, on paper, the idea of having every hero be playable at the exact same time, and it's kind of like utopia. I mean, when you think about it, it sounds like it would be amazing, and if you could pull it off, it would be amazing. But I don't think it will ever happen, and it hasn't ever happened for any other game. But as well, I don't think it's too big of a problem, and again, today I'll be talking about why I think it's still alright that this game will probably never be balanced, and I'll try to compare it a little bit to some other games that are pretty popular right now. Now, I think where I want to start right here is start by talking about why the game won't really ever be balanced, and I think the easiest way to go over this is by setting up a situation. So let's say a brand new game's coming out and it's a fighting game. Let's say in this fighting game there is one character. Well, technically that's probably going to be the most balanced fighting game that's coming out. I mean, both players have the same chance to do the same moves with the same frame data. They both do the same damage. They can both outplay each other at the same rate. And it's essentially 100% based off of the players and their reads. But that isn't very fun. So what do game developers do? Well, they add new characters with new things about them. Maybe somebody kicks a little bit faster but does a little bit less damage. Maybe somebody else kills the opponent in like 2 hits, but it takes like 2 whole seconds to have his attacks actually come out. They're interesting characters, but by design, they've broken the balance that the game originally had. And I think that's kind of how I see a lot of games, and that's kind of why I think essentially any game can't be truly balanced, because the only way to have it be truly balanced is by having the same interaction between every single character. That's not really what it is. Different players have different abilities on their characters, different roles, different things they can do, and it's not even like a game like CSGO where you can all, use the same gun if you want to. In this game, you have to choose different characters. You can't all be playing Tracer every single game. And I think in general, there's just too many interactions in this game to make it completely balanced. I think it's impossible to make all the heroes good at once, and here's a really good example. Let's say Widowmaker is a god right now. How is Pharah gonna do anything? She really can't, unless there's a hero that can somehow block one-shots from the Widowmaker, but then wouldn't that make Pharah too good, and then she'd beat Widowmaker, and it would be back and forth? One of them has to be good, and one of them has to kind of counteract them. And I think that's where a big problem comes with an Overwatch, is that it is a game based off of counters, and that sure is completely fine, and a real core part about the game. But I think a thing that it also brings with the game is the fact that if a counter is very good against somebody else, but has no big counters themselves, then you can't really beat that character. And I think since counterpicking is just so strong in Overwatch and such a big part of the element, the character that has the least counters is usually the one that's winning. The character that has affinity to not losing to dive in the current meta, or a character that works really well with Brigitte in the current meta, or really whatever it is, that's the character that's going to be really great. Right now in our situation, it's probably going to be Hanzo, because he can beat most of his counters and no one really counters him right now. That's kind of how it is, and maybe on paper we could come up with a meta sometime where everybody has a counter, but then essentially it boils down to who mains what character, and if you luckily main the right character versus somebody else, then you kind of win. Either way, I think it's just kind of how the game is and how the game's based around counterpicks, which again, a game like CSGO doesn't really need to deal with as much as a game like Overwatch. Now, I think that's really, in my opinion, why the game won't be balanced, but I also want to talk about why it's okay that the game won't be balanced. And I like a lot of really unbalanced games. I like Dragon Ball FighterZ, which is kind of balanced, but not really. I like a lot of Super Smash Bros., Melee especially, which is extremely unbalanced, let's be honest here. And even a lot of other shooter games. Sometimes Call of Duty, that's a pretty fun game. Not the most balanced game either. But I think a really good benefit of having an unbalanced game is that it makes it that the game is really quite fun, and it makes it that it's not so stale. And I think another good thing about it is that it makes so that, especially the developers are actually developing the game and updating it, in let's say Super Smash Bros. For Wii U's example, the meta will change around, and the characters that are good will change around, and it won't be the same game forever. And I think that's very important for a game like Overwatch that wants to exist for a very long time. Now, if you have a certain game that you only want to exist for like, a year or two, that's completely fine, especially single player games, whatever. I don't really think changes matter too much. But in a game like Overwatch, as we've seen with League of Legends and Dota and all of that, you kind of do need a different meta, because if you don't, people get bored in this type of team game. And I think oftentimes people think the meta gets stale even after just like 6 months. And this is the thing I want to point out here. I think a lot of people want a fun game more than a balanced meta, and they want an ever-changing game that's adding new things, that's adding new changes, that's adding new characters, more than the same meta that's been there for like 3 years. Because the thing about it is that it's really exciting. You get to see all this new stuff, you get to see new interactions. The game isn't just the same way that it's been. And yes, I think it makes the game inherently less competitive and far less friendly for pro players to get into, but it keeps it a lot more hype for most people. And I think especially in a team game like Overwatch, that can really get kind of stuck on the same things happening over and over again, and where it's really hard to like just kind of figure out how to outplay the opponents, because in a fighting game you can kind of figure out how to adapt, and as I talked about in Overwatch, it's very hard to do that. I think essentially forcing the game to change can be a really enjoyable way to switch things up and to make people really engage in the game. And the thing I want to say right here is that I think different metas keep the game exciting, and oftentimes they will bring back old players that are bored with the game. For myself, from like season 7 to 8, and sometimes even 9, I just didn't like play the game at all. I did not enjoy the meta. I thought it wasn't fun at all, and I was getting really bored of the game. But then in the really late season 9 and season 10, I started to get way back into it, started to play it a lot. Lately, I haven't been playing it too much, but really it kind of goes back and forth, and it keeps the game at least somewhat exciting. And I think especially for players, it always gives them something to hope for, because if their character sucks, well, I can learn them now and maybe they'll be good in the future, so it's really worth the investment. Well, on the other hand, you'll pick up a new character because they're really OP, and that'll switch it up a bit. I think overall, if it was the same thing forever, it would, in many cases, bore a lot of players. Now, the extremely competitive players, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't bore them. We've had games like Super Smash Bros. Melee with no changes forever, and people are still playing that and loving that, and I am. But I think for the especially more casual crowd, it isn't that exciting at a certain point, especially in a game similarly to Overwatch and League. We can see that that's actually the case, because both these games get changed all of the time. Now, another thing I want to say right here is that these changes also do bring a lot of hype to the game. And I think this is extremely important, because in the case of a game like Overwatch, there are so many other games floating around right now, and it's really hard to keep people playing your same game. And I know that it shouldn't be, but in a lot of cases, games die within like 2 to 3 years. And that's just kind of how it is. And if you keep your game the same way for years on end, people will forget about it. But if you add new changes that people are happy about, or angry about, or hyped up about, whatever it is, it brings your community together, it keeps them loud, it keeps them entertained, it keeps them with stuff to talk about, and I think it, again, helps the less hardcore crowd, which is usually the bigger community, except for the very rare cases, again, like Smash Bros. Melee. Most of the games, though, the biggest community isn't this, really competitive part of it. Now, one of the final things I want to mention here is that I think that the way that Overwatch is balancing the game is oftentimes also geared towards spectators, because they do want to be an esport type game, and I know League of Legends does this a lot. They balance the game so that spectators will be entertained. Because, again, for pros, this is really annoying. It's really hard to get into the game because you never know when a change will happen. It's extremely frustrating. But for the spectator, if you see the same game for like a year on end, some people will enjoy that, but a lot of people would rather see something new. And in a game like League of Legends, that's been working great for them. And spectators honestly just seem to get bored of the same game forever in an ever-changing market. But again, with a game like League, when it changes all the time, there's always something new to look at. And I think that it really is a different market than sports. And I think it's kind of hard to compare these two, because in sports, these games have been lasting for years. And you could say that they haven't had any changes, but at the same time, they're very ingrained into our society. They're very, I guess, just accepted. And they really do have a big hold on a lot of people, and they're a lot easier to get into. While esports, I think, do have to put in a little bit more effort at this point to start up their community. And maybe after a while, again, Smash Brothers, those can start to build and grow. But to begin with, yeah, I think the changes can be really important. And I think, sometimes games like CSGO can kind of pull this off because realism. But again, like Overwatch, I think it does need some changes in it to, again, keep people really excited. And, that is beneficial for the Overwatch team because they want to get a lot of people watching the Overwatch League. Now, something I should mention here is that this does alienate a lot of players, but it also gives a lot of players something to do. So it's kind of a 50-50, but it seems to be a 50-50 that a lot of people are taking. And I think in general, it's an okay 50-50 to use. For myself, personally, I do like a lot of balance changes. I like to see the game changed. I love League of Legends, not even mainly because of the core gameplay right now, but just because there's always something new coming out, always something changing, always something I can learn. And I know a lot of people hate that. They want it to go back to what it was in the past, and the same thing can apply to Overwatch. But at least for me, I think that's really exciting. And overall, those are my main ideas about why I think that Overwatch will never be balanced, but why that's not the worst thing in the world. Now, maybe it would be better if it was balanced. Maybe it wouldn't be, but I'm just kind of accepting what I think is going to be happening and talking about why I think it's not the worst thing in the world again. But again, this has just been my own opinion, so if you do have your own opinion, please leave that down in the comment section down below, as I'm sure a lot of you guys will probably not be agreeing with this, but I would like to hear what you guys had to say. Anyways, as always, guys, though, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like, hit the subscribe button, or hit that notification button, because I actually want to talk about stuff that I think is interesting like this in the future. That hopefully hasn't been talked about way too much before. But as always, guys, thank you all for watching, and have a wonderful day.